Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Knicks Film School pregame show. My name is Andrew Claudio, a.k.a. GMAC, and it is time to preview a Friday night Knicks matchup in Detroit, Michigan, against the Pistons, who just got their first win. And for those of you that are officially out of baseball season and are picking up the basketball season, I can tell you that you missed an exhilarating Knicks win on Wednesday night down in South Beach, featuring 44 points and 13 rebounds from newcomer Karl-Anthony Towns. Hopefully, any of us that have been watching the Knicks season from the beginning and have enjoyed the highs of the two wins and the, oh no, they're still figuring this out from the two losses, were able to get some solace in that performance on Wednesday night. As a Pistons team that, while they're 1-4, have looked very fun and very competent, which is not something we've been able to say over the years. And who else to talk about how competent they've looked so far through the first 5 games than a man I can now confidently say, because it's the truth, a colleague of mine, Mr. Bryce Simon, Motor City Hoops himself of the Pistons Pulse. And I have to this isn't even a shameless plug, because it's just the truth, and a worthy plug myself, from the Game Theory podcast with Sam Vecini. Bryce Simon, good morning, sir. Happy Halloween, and welcome to the Knicks Film School pregame show.
I mean, I'm just glad that you still like me, since my trivia apparently is anti-GMAC. By the way, GMAC is the coolest nickname ever.
Thank you. Thank you, Robert Cross. It's Robert, one of our patrons, coined it 2 years ago, because it's real. I make a lot of decisions here. So he just went GMAC, can we? And then it was the most ridiculous ask, and it stuck. So thank you, Robert.
I love it. It's really good. I don't have a cool nickname, but yeah, I'm excited to be here. I think maybe for a 1-4 Pistons team, I may talk a little more positive than people are going to anticipate, maybe the Knicks fans would anticipate, because I think you said it perfectly. It's fun and competent basketball. And after many years of not watching that since I started doing this, that's really exciting to watch.
Yeah, so I want to just piggyback on the trivia aspect of it for a second, because I have a bit of a reputation for knowing baseless knowledge here at Knicks Film School. People will just be surprised when I remember this obscure Knicks stat. My wife actually tested me. We were on the way back from dinner last night, and she was like, the weirdest stuff. And she's like, the RBI leader of the Mets in 2016. And I was like, yeah, it was Cespedes. I was like, how do you know that? And then she's like, the Knicks first 10 wins of this season. And then the Game Theory podcast happened, and it's like, do you know the 10 players who shot 25% or better for this week and a half this month?
This isn't fair. This is not fair. This is not fair. You and Sam make it seem like it's like the stats that ESPN will bring up sometime to make somebody who's not playing well, like they got to get something.
Thad Young graphic.
It's like in the fourth quarter of games that are 20-point blowouts, Thad Young shooting 60% from the field. Not to accidentally take shots at Thad Young. That's not nice.
That's the graphic, though, that everybody points to. It's
still not nice.
The boast says. See, this is why I like Bryce, is that you look at these guys as humans. You look at them as more than just statistics. And it's why I think I gravitate to your analysis so much.
Well, thank you.
And the beauty of what this Piston season has been, and as we could, like that transition, is
beautiful.
The humanity that you're seeing in this team as more than just a collection of players. Obviously, the chaos of last season under Monty, and now they're like a team. They're like
chaos is an interesting word, because that's not the word I would have used to describe.
So what is the word you would
a disaster?
Disaster under Monty. Fine. So okay, let's just start there. How much of a disaster was it?
Here's the humanity in me. I think Monty's probably a great person. Everything we've heard is true. I've never met the man in person. Monty was going through some real life off the court stuff. And maybe he ended up taking on something he and his family and his situation truly wasn't for. Like, that's what I've told myself to believe. And again, I'm being real here with the humanity side of it. He was dealing with real stuff off the floor.
Yeah.
And I don't want to get into it because it's not my business. I mean, it's public knowledge, but I don't know the ins and outs of it. But I think now as we look back and I see how this team looks this season with different parts, but still, it's not like a loaded roster or something like that. And specifically on the defensive end, which we'll talk about more, I'm sure. Last year was a disaster. Like whatever it wasn't well coached. It wasn't organized. It wasn't energetic. Maybe it was simply the 28 game losing streak. And obviously that wears on people. But last year was a disaster. I don't think there's any way you can sugarcoat what last season was for this organization.
That 28 game losing streak, the Knicks had a hand in helping that end because it ended against the Raptors team that had just made a pretty significant trade.
And hadn't they played the Knicks a week or so? Like, I'm pretty sure
it was just before they had just played the Knicks.
Yeah, we came on Knicks. I came on Knicks Film School, I believe, for the first time, and you were very nervous that this streak, and I think the Pistons gave them all they wanted in that game, and then the Knicks went ahead and pulled it out.
Wasn't over until the fourth quarter. And back then, here's how long ago that was.
It was the foul. It was the fouls that weren't called. Like Dante had like
that was later. No, that was later. Okay. That was the February game. You know, like who am I to question a referee? Referees are humans too. Talk about humanity. Who am I to question the judgment of our elected referees and officials? I look back at that game, the one during the losing streak that you're talking about. You want to talk about roster turnover, and the highlight of that game was, man, RJ and Quickly didn't have it that night, but thank God for Dante DiVincenzo and Julius Randle. And I just named 4 people that don't play for the Knicks anymore, and we'll get into them.
Yes, we will.
Into that in just a second. The Pistons offseason, though, and what they did and the turnover, whether it be just from Monty to JB Bickerstaff to like Quentin Grimes, the Knicks traded to the Pistons last year, is no longer there. Tim Hardaway Jr. is there. Malik Beasley is there. Tobias Harris is there. And while that's not I mean, respectfully, that's not a
murder
neon sign. Well, it's not a neon sign offseason, right?
Yeah.
It's bringing adults into the room. So you tell me, how much has that had an effect on just the overall competency that I'm alluding to?
Yeah, so here's the big stats from those guys. Tim Hardaway Jr. right now is shooting 53% from 3 on 6 attempts. That's real floor spacing gravity, Andrew. And we know Tim Hardaway Jr. is not going to shoot 53% for the whole year, but you know what he will do? He'll shoot 6 attempts, and that's important. Malik Beasley, 38% on 7.5 attempts. Yet again, real gravity. You know what shooting gravity brings? Floor spacing. You know what guys with the ball in their hands need to look good? Floor spacing. So what those two guys have provided is a nice start to the year for Cade Cunningham, who is scoring 26, 7.5, 5.5 on 47, 40, 86. And Jaden Ivey, who's averaging 21, 4.5, 3.5 on 48, 43, 75. Do those sound like quality numbers for your 2 young backcourt guards who you really had a season where we need to see whether these guys can play together? How good is or is not Jaden Ivey? If you want to talk to last year, you know what Jaden Ivey wasn't doing? He wasn't averaging 21 points. You know why? Because he was coming off the bench for Killian Hayes, who, God bless him, isn't in the NBA right now.
Yeah.
You got energized Bryce in the morning. I don't know what's going on.
I'm happy we did it.
I don't know what's going on. Game theory will not have this much energy tonight.
So the day has just started is why. For those who don't know, we're recording this it's a little before 8:00 Eastern, which do the math on what Bryce is an hour behind me. So
I've already up. I got a little workout in, took a shower. I got my coffee here in the Yeti. So apparently I got all my energy right now before I go teach my students.
Well, I would love to take all the credit for why Knicks Film School has injected this energy, but clearly the competent Pistons are responsible for this. And you mentioned all the different the floor spacing, just having other players that complement your 2 main guys that matter how that can lead to just an overall better product across the board. On the court, though, what are you seeing as far as, spacing being a thing, obviously with Cade not being the biggest shooter and just surrounding him with shooters might actually be the play. But for the Knicks fan that hasn't watched a ton of Pistons basketball yet, what are you seeing on the court that they're implementing or JB's put in that's taking advantage or put these guys in the right position to succeed?
Yeah, I don't know that offensively there's a ton that I'm like, oh my gosh, like I'm just oohing and awing about in my notes. I will say there was a crazy stat from the game last night. I don't have it specific. I have them in my notes. I won't pull it up, but essentially Cade and J.I. have been on the court and or for almost 100% of the minutes this season, like 97.9 or something. Last year, it was 73%. So what we're seeing is these guys, yes, they play together, but then they get staggered a lot. And so you always have a guy who, yes, Cade has a lot of turnovers right now. That's the downside of Cade Cunningham's start to the season. J.I. can get a little bit sped up and out of control at times, but in general, you're seeing both of these guys on the court or one or the other. They do some nice secondary transition actions where on an empty side, they'll run Malik Beasley on a ghost as Cade's dribbling it down or some DHO stuff. There's a few mini Tobias Harris post-ups for my liking, but it is what it is. We kind of went over that. Tobias has not had a good start to the year.
I was going to ask, how is he doing?
It hasn't
the
been
numbers
good.
aren't. Yeah,
the numbers aren't good,
great.
and the eye test meets the numbers. So since I spewed out all the stats, he's averaging just under 12 points. He is rebounding the crap out of the ball, 8.4 rebounds a game, but he's shooting 37% from the field, 15% from three. I will say last night in Philly, he hit a big shot as they were kind of trying to close out that game. And then he got the real, like, this is it, nail in the coffin shot, which was kind of cool for him because he was getting booed all night in Philly, which, I mean, was expected because it's Philly, even though they didn't want him there anymore, but you're booed that he left. Like,
it's one of those where the relationship was so over, and then the first time you see your ex, it's like, oh, I have resentment towards you. What I would just personally say is someone with no dog in the Pistons versus Sixers fight or game that happened last night. I was just very happy for two reasons: one, that Philly lost, and two, that the Pistons weren't coming into this game 0-5, so that way they'd be even more desperate for a win on Friday. But continue.
The other thing I'll say that JB does an interesting job of is, and this seems very simple to me, I would assume your listeners, because I know they know ball, but he makes these offensive, defensive subs at the end of quarters that make a lot of sense that I feel like Monty, and I don't even know if, as much as I like Dwayne Casey, I don't even know if Dwayne did it. We've seen multiple times now, like into the first quarter, Cade and Tobias are usually subbed out in the rotation, but then he'll bring those guys back if the Pistons are getting the ball sideline out of bounds with 26 seconds left in the quarter. It hasn't always paid off, but I just like the idea and the theory behind that. I will tell you though, like, this is a long way of getting to what I think has been the biggest improvement defensively. It's not even close. I sent out a tweet last night. Yeah, Cade and J.I. have been better offensively, Andrew. It doesn't even come close to those two guys' improvement on the defensive end. It does not come close. J.I. will guard Jalen Brunson on Friday night. I don't know if he'll do a good job or not because Jalen Brunson is one of the 5-10 best scorers, at least in the NBA, maybe just players, right? So does J.I. make him work for it a little bit more? Maybe Brunson gets him in foul trouble with a couple shot fakes in the mid-range. J.I. can get a little bit worked up, and that may be something we see. But he's taken Donovan Mitchell matchups. He took the Tyrese Maxey matchup last night. He has taken great strides. And Cade Cunningham, who I have said from day one in the league hasn't been good defensively, that's been one of my biggest critiques of Cade, has been awesome. Like, I think Cade is a plus defender through 5 games of this season. I like to give players credit for their improvement because I don't always like to blame coaches whenever players are playing bad. So I will give Cade and J.I. credit, but JB and his staff have done an awesome job with this defense. I think their defensive rating right now is 18th. I didn't think it would be anywhere near that. And again, I know it's 5 games, small sample size. They were bottom 3 in the NBA last season, and I expected close to the same this year. And so far, it's been much improved.
That's the thing. You want to see a good start. You want to create a floor, create a ceiling even, and just like try to stay up there as much as possible. Or I guess in the Pistons case, want to stay above that floor as much as possible. Like, I go back to the Knicks teams, the first Knicks team with Tibbs, and it was like, listen, they're like 23rd in offense. If that's the floor and they just maintain a top 4 or 5 defense, maybe they can have some fun this season. And with this year's Knicks team, it's like, I need like a top 5 offense, and then we'll see what happens as you figure out the defense. A couple Pistons questions before we transition to the Knicks, though, because I'm now very intrigued by the multiple looks that we're going to see tomorrow night. both like when Cade is running the offense with J.I. off the court, or when Jaden Ivey's on and Cade's off, and what they surround him with, whether it's a Fontecchio and a Beasley and as you mentioned, Tim Hardaway Jr. and his floor spacing. I must ask about once a Knick, always a Knick, Jalen Duren, who there was a movement for Knicks fans that are like, I cannot believe we traded him to make room for cap space for Isaiah Hartenstein, who just got $87 million and might have swung the title
Isaiah Hartenstein. I would take Isaiah
over Jalen Duren. I think so.
I didn't say no. You put words in my mouth. That's not what I said.
Me. You would just take Isaiah Hartenstein in general in a vacuum.
I'll put a period right there for now.
I'll take Isaiah Hartenstein deal. So, I mean, tell me a little bit about, just the younger other players that we haven't mentioned. Jalen Duren, Ron Holland. I've only seen the numbers. So, like, what are we seeing from these kids so far?
Yeah, so Duren's a little bit of a struggle to the season. His numbers overall are down. Now, he got in big time foul trouble last night and didn't play very minutes. So that skewed the data just a little bit. I think I was talking to someone offensively. I don't think we've seen anything we haven't seen early. He's play finishing very well. He's shooting like 86% from the field, but he's only getting 4 attempts again. It's all play finishing. The passing is still intriguing at times. He does a little bit of that. Jalen Duren's a really good rebounder. I mean, one thing Cat's going to have to do on Friday night, if Cat gets exposed on the defensive end from Jalen Duren, it's because he gives up 7 or 8. Like that's where Duren and even Isaiah Stewart can really hurt you right now offensively. It just kill you on the offensive boards. Defensively, Isaiah Stewart's a better defensive big right now than Jalen Duren in his career. Like, I don't even think it's close. Just because Stu is so active with his hands, he has some switchability on the perimeter. He backpedals better in drop coverage, all of that. Duren has gotten a little bit better, but it's still not. It's been a slow start. As exciting as it's been for Cade and J.I., it's been a little bit of the opposite for Duren. Ron Holland, real quick, very good defensively, has been really good. He gets after it. He's gotten into a couple scuffles already 5 games into his NBA career, which I love. And, Pistons fans love, players like that. Why Isaiah Stewart was a fan favorite as he's chasing LeBron around with a bloody eye. And offensively, he stayed confident while not efficient is the nicest way of saying it. He struggled offensively. You can see where his offensive game has some areas of growth, especially when it's not transition.
Well, so that's why I'm so intrigued by you bringing up Tim Hardaway's floor spacing and how important that's been.
Yeah.
And you look, Cade Cunningham's also shooting 40% from 3 on 7 attempts so far. And Jaden Ivey, as you mentioned, is shooting over 40, I believe it's 43% from 3 on almost 6 attempts so far. So you've got 3 guys right there that are shooting the crap out of the ball so far. And then you have true dunker spy, centers in Isaiah Stewart and Duren. And it's why I'm so intrigued by the Tobias factor of this. And look, this is a new world for me, where I went from the Mitchell Robinson, Nerlens Noel, Isaiah Hartenstein, mostly dunker spy. And then the Julius Randle has gravity, but it's not shooting gravity. It's the downhill gravity. And now I'm in this 5-out true stretch 5 world where Josh Hart is now looked at as a liability to some Knicks fans, even though he might be the hardest worker in the NBA and a playoff hero to this franchise. As far as it pertains to the Pistons, though, on the court, what do you coverage wise? What do you think would be the best thing for the Knicks to play? They may switch a little bit. They're going to play cat and a lot of drop. But just for this matchup in particular, the Knicks not having to deal with 4 shooters at any point, is that going to be advantageous to the Knicks? Yeah, it'll be interesting how the Knicks match up in this game, right? So I assume they'll probably put Cat on Duren, Hart on Harris, quote unquote hide Brunson on Tim Hardaway Jr. I actually think putting Brunson on Harris might be the thing they try to do.
So that will be interesting. So I think what the Knicks then will challenge the Pistons to do is play into those Harris mid post isolations. And Detroit has done that. But I think if I'm JB and I see Brunson, the Knicks' best offensive weapon, on Tobias Harris, a bigger player, I'm probably going to lean into that early in the game and see if he can go get some buckets or if he can get some fouls on Jalen Brunson. So that would be, because I was going to say the one thing with Brunson guarding Hardaway Jr. is Detroit will run him off actions off the ball, especially out of timeouts, start of quarters, games, stuff like that. So Brunson would have to be chasing him. I assume OG on Cade and Mikal on J.I. Just
one or the other. Yeah.
However it works. I think OG's physicality on Cade would probably be the right matchup there. But J.I. could give both of those guys a little bit of trouble with just his first step and his downhill speed. The one thing I'll say about Cat in drop, Cade loves the mid-range. So like that's one way. If there is something that Cade and the ball screen offense could expose, it could be that. If I was a team right now, I would double Cade and see if he could make the right decisions out of it. And if the Pistons can truly make you pay once he gets out of it. Can Duren make the right read? Can they swing and Tobias actually knock down the corner three? I don't know how much the Knicks have done that, but if Cade really gets it going, I would trap him and at least see if all of those things could go right before then I tried something else.
So I don't know if you'll see a lot of double teams on Cade, but there will be a lot of hedge and recover. And I think that's been one of the adjustments Tibbs has made. Like we honestly have to just take the Celtics game out of the calculation completely. They faced a team that decided to miss no threes for a night. There's no defense that could have stopped them. But from the other three games you've seen, if they're beating you in drop in the first half, then it's a lot of Brunson, blitzing on the screens and then recovering quickly, and then you're just rotating from then on. Like even last night, the Heat shot the ball really well, got a lot of shots that they wanted. But I mean, it was honestly a Knicks primary offensive night. I wonder if Cade's killing them in the mid range on that drop coverage. Do they then, switch things up? I'm fascinated by the thought of if Tobias Harris is killing Brunson, or if like they do have Tim Hardaway Jr. on Brunson guarding Tim Hardaway Jr. Does that? I look at it as if Tim Hardaway Jr. and Tobias Harris are your offense, that's a win because it's not Cade Cunningham and Jaden Ivey.
No, 100%. Like to me, that's what the Celtics do every game. The Celtics purposely put Drew Holiday on the most ridiculous matchup you can think of, and it works because he's awesome. And then you're like, you know what? We're going to post up our fifth best player, or our fifth best player is going to go ISO. Or you know who else they do it with? Luke Cornett and Sam Hauser. And those guys are just good enough. If it's your fifth best offensive option, the Celtics are like, we'll live with it. You know why? Because we win the math game, because we're going to go make a bunch of threes anyway. I don't want to compare the Knicks 1-to-1, but it's similar, right? The Knicks can go, you know what? Tobias, you take 15 mid-range post fadeaways over Jalen Brunson.
Bingo.
And then on the other end, Karl-Anthony Towns is going to bang 6 threes and Deuce is going to bang 6 threes, and we win the math game. And I'm honestly interested to see if that's how this game goes. I hope it doesn't. I just feel like in the past, this is where my head's still at, even though it's a new coaching staff, is they would see this veteran Tobias Harris with this smaller player. Here's what I hope they do, Andrew. I hope they run 1-4 ball screens, force the Brunson onto Cade switch, and then let Cade attach Brunson in the mid post, because Cade's pretty good in the mid post, or then attack Brunson that way. And I do think they've been better hunting mismatches. They did it to Darius Garland. That's one thing I want to say about the Pistons. They've been in every game this year. And I know for a lot of fans of teams like the Knicks are like, so what? Like, win. Yes. But when you're coming, they should have beat the Celtics. They had the Celtics down 6 with like 2 minutes left to go. And then Drew Holiday made 3 enormous plays. That's why the Celtics are so good.
That's the Celtics. Yeah.
They should have beat Indiana on opening night. The Cavs, who are 5-0, I think right now, I think beat them by 11 or something like that. Like they've been in every single game, been very, very competitive.
So that's what I'm looking forward to, is the competitive Pistons, which look, I'm not trying to be condescending here. That's an upgrade over what we've seen in the past, regardless of the fact that 2 of the Knicks Pistons games last year did go down to the wire with alleged controversial calls happening at the end of said games.
I mean, here's what I'll say is I wrote in my notes last night, the Pistons beat a very shorthanded Sixers team and kind of blew them out. They had them down 20 a couple times in the second half. But the Sixers still had Tyrese Maxey and Pistons killer Kelly Oubre, who I feel like me and I will not say who I was texting with, joked that he was going to go. I said he's going to go for 30. And then the person texted me back and the little asterisk and said, no, he's going to go for 45. Because that's what Kelly Oubre does. But they beat a Sixers team last night And I said, that's a game they lose last year. Like there was so many games last year where you're going in to play a team and their stars are out or they're depleted or whatever. And you're like, this is the night they can get a win. This happened all the time during the losing streak. And they just found a way to lose. And last night, not only did they win, but they kind of looked like the better team, which almost never happened even in the 14 wins last year. So I say all this to say they'll probably lay an egg against the Knicks on Friday. And your listeners will be like, this guy does not know ball.
Well, first of all, that is one thing that will not happen, is as far as people saying that you don't know ball. And the second thing that is very much in play is the Knicks laying an egg after an emotional win in Miami on Wednesday night. The Knicks are still, regardless of how good things looked in Miami, they're still figuring it out. And this is a team that made a lot of changes. Like you mentioned, like the math game. This was their first game of finally getting to 43s. They were hunting these threes in the first half. They had 20 in each half is what they went for. Mikal Bridges shot 11 threes in this game. And it seemed like there was a concerted effort because this was their first game getting to that 43-point attempt mark, that they were going to not be a team that mismatch hunts and tries to, in the past, like take advantage of drives and get to the rim. No, we're penetrating with the intention to pitch. And so that's why I'm intrigued to see if this continues against the now competitive Pistons team. I want your thoughts on the Knicks because so here's the complication here, Bryce. I know your thoughts on the Knicks. I was on a pod with you and you gave your thoughts to the Karl-Anthony Towns trade, but there are Knicks Film School listeners that may not have caught that. And I also wonder if they've changed through the first 5 games or 4 games of the season. So if you can give me your reaction to the Mikal Bridges trade, then your reaction to the Karl-Anthony Towns trade and just what the Knicks offseason was, and, like what this means for your calculation and where they stack up in the East as contenders.
Yeah, I mean, my thing with the Knicks is I just feel like they're so all in now. Like they went from a team where, honestly, on Game Theory, we spent every podcast oohing and awing and gushing over the depth and the assets and the flexibility. And then Jalen Brunson signs his contract that just makes it even more so. And then you look now and you have Towns on the books for 50 to 60 million for 4 years. And you have OG on the books for 39 to 49 million. And obviously the Brunson contract's still ridiculous. They're about to pay Mikal Bridges at some point. And it's like, listen, you could be locked into worse cores, right? Like you could be locked into way worse cores than what this is. That was exciting to me, like seeing them make such good decisions. And I kind of like hey, I know Deuce is still there, but is it going to be Deuce or is it going to be Dante? Or, you have all of these different guys. I love Dante. And so I kind of hated to see that. I've had a soft spot for Julius Randle. You know why? Like he the first video breakdown I ever did was on Julius Randle that really kind of hit. It was against the Hawks in the playoffs. And I kind of was a video breaking down why it wasn't all his fault that the offense wasn't very good whenever 5 guys are standing in the lane staring at him when he has the ball.
Gravity.
Gravity. And so I always have a soft spot for Julius. So I don't dislike this Knicks team. I'm just nervous. Well, I guess you could argue the ceiling is higher. That's probably true. I just think the floor's lower.
Yeah.
And I think my natural instinct is to not like that, but that may not be a championship mentality, right? Like, I think as I've look at how I see the game, I want to give myself a chance. I want to be competitive every single year. I want to go and then in the playoffs, maybe it makes it happen. I don't want that floor of like, dang, 1 or 2 injuries and this thing is cooked, So I don't mind it. I don't know that it's what I would have done. I guess it's kind of, I think that's where I'm at.
So I think we've talked a lot about this on the pregame pod because I want to get other people's perspective on this. And I got to be honest, the suddenness of the trade, the Karl-Anthony Towns trade, had me processing it where I went on our show, Knicks Film School, and gave one take. Then with you guys at Game Theory, I gave another take. Then I went back on Knicks Film School and gave another, like, everywhere I went, it's like, I'm still processing this. Like this, they're now all in after years of they're up to something. Is it Donovan Mitchell? Is it Joel Embiid? Is it Anthony Davis? Is it this or that? Well, in the last calendar year, they've made 4 trades. One with the Pistons, which was more of a depth play, but like the Anunoby trade happened. The Bridges trade happened. The Towns trade happened. And now, like you said, they're all in. And to the floor and the ceiling, as far as the what the roster could potentially give you, there's also a new floor and ceiling of expectations. But I got to be honest, the outcome to this being a disappointing season also now has like a very narrow road. So it's almost as if like in the past, like, oh, you know what? They made the second round. That was good. Oh, they were competitive against a good team. Like if they lost to the Celtics last year, I would have been fine. They lost to the Pacers last year. And I was like, this is one of my favorite Knicks teams ever.
We all loved them. Everybody.
Right. The hardworking Knicks, where it seemed like the way they were winning is they were just trying.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, oh my gosh, I love this Knicks team that tries. I don't see that from a lot of NBA teams. And now that you're all in, it's like, unless they lose to the Celtics, and even if they lose to the Celtics in the conference finals, it's a disappointing season. And all those other possibilities, like losing in the second round, is no longer an accepted thing. Losing in the first round is no longer an accepted thing.
Yeah.
So that now creates this mentality of, oh, the Cat had 44 against the Heat. Who cares? Like, are they going to be Boston at the end of the year? Like, there's that newfound expectation on this season. And it's why I understand if you're like that risk now creates this not necessarily anxiety on it, but this pressure on what they've done, you know?
That's a great point, because I think that's where the floor actually is lower. Maybe not that the team could actually be that bad, but the expectations got raised so much that you can really fall below. Like there's a lot of outcomes where you fall below. Listen, if they make the Eastern Conference Finals, and even if they got swept by the Celtics, if the Celtics continue to look, I know they lost last night, but if they continue to be the team we think they are, I would still be like, okay. Because I think a little bit of what the Knicks have to do is maybe just wait this Celtics thing out, like just see if it transitions out eventually, and then you're the team. Maybe why I would have waited another year to do this, because I think we're a year away from the Celtics. I don't know. Like, I don't know what's going to happen with them selling of the team, and if the new ownership wants to, I don't know how long they're going to be able to keep it together. But with that's not a reason not to go for it, because one injury could happen and the Knicks are the favorite all of a sudden. I still think they're the second best team in the East, I guess, is where I'm at. And so if they lose to the Celtics in the conference finals, I don't think it's a disappointing season for them. That is the only expectation, is at least a conference finals. You end up the 5 seed and lose in the first round. And now everybody's just like, why did you do this? You know, type of thing. I think the disappointing thing for me is, I think the more I look at it, I'm like, why is this defense not better? Because OG, Mikal, like that was my biggest takeaway from the Celtics game. You have OG, Mikal, Josh Hart. You have the roster to defend this team. If anybody does, you do. Like, you have the roster, you have the wings to defend this team, and it wasn't working. So I'm just looking at defensive rating. Is it as bad as 27th in the NBA so far? The defensive rating?
No. I'll say this. Well, so not no is actually the appropriate response to that, because it's not yes and it's not no. They're still figuring out navigating both Cat on the floor, who his defensive limitations are just, they're there. Like they exist. And Jalen Brunson. And they have 2 guys with defensive limitations, and then 3 wings that are doing a lot of work to hide those defensive limitations. It's why I think the focus has now changed from like the floor of a top 15, top 10 defense, and then we'll see what the offense is, to like, you need to have a top 3 or 4 offense, and then, you know, the defense hopefully gets to like top 15, 16. Again, the Celtics game is tough for me to quantify into what they were,
and that
this
probably
year.
really still hurts the defensive rating,
right? Like they were so bad. Like the Celtics were all-time great, and Mikal Bridges was poor that night. Like that, Tatum was cooking him, and he was just really poor on screen navigation. The point of attack was bad.
That's what I have in my head right now is like, man, the idea around Mikal was, okay, you're going to come in and be the third option now that Cat is here. Your defense, you should be all defense. Like, you should be first team, like be back to that player. And I watched that night and I was like, that doesn't look like the defensive player I was expecting him to be. That's why I'm fascinated for Friday. Like, if Cade and J.I. kind of get after them, I would be a little bit nervous. As good as I think those guys are, they're still young players in this league. If they can't stop those two, even if the Knicks win, I think you have some real defensive concerns, not knowing how the other 3 games of the Knicks have looked so far.
So game 1, Tatum just like flatly cooked Mikal for 37 points. And then, like I said, the screen navigation wasn't great. Game 2, Tyrese Halliburton primarily being guarded by Mikal Bridges scored 0 points that night. Now, so go. Like there's obviously some shot was off
have
to
a good night last night?
Hero did, and that's where they're still figuring it out. To the point, because like they had Anunoby on Jimmy, and then obviously like again they're finding holes in their defense, and they're trying to figure out how to navigate it. But this is where the newfound focus on offense allows you to get like to have a Tyler Hero go off, but you still end up winning the game because you're winning the math game. And like last thing before I get to the Mount Rushmore question that I have to wrap up all these pods with, the Josh Hart of it all has become a talking point where I love Josh Hart, and yet I recognize against the Celtics when you're going to have to go all in on the math, like the Pacers, the reason they match up so well against the Celtics is they're always willing to play the math game. Like, okay, fine, we're 5 out too. We have 5 shooters too. And Josh Hart, I think, has navigated the fact that he's not a great shooter, but he's always moving. There's no like, I'm going to hide this guy on him or sag off of Josh Hart, because he's always moving. There's no sagging off of Josh Hart. But like their 5 out spacing lineup shouldn't include Josh Hart, right? Their best one, because it would probably include Deuce. And there's like a movement from math Twitter that's like, we should start Deuce McBride over Josh Hart. And that's where I wrestle with it, because I recognize what the math means and what it's going to matter, again, to that new expectation of, well, the Celtics are the goal here. But I also think Josh Hart's awesome, and they're going to win a ton of games. So with him as the starting 2 guard. So I just want to get your take on that, like the Deuce versus Hart thing that now exists in Knicks land.
Listen, I want Deuce to win 6 Man of the Year. So no, like keep him coming off the bench.
Okay.
Deuce is trying to make me look really smart right now, because I'm pretty sure he was one of the first names I dropped on our guy breakout players of the year or something like that. And I realized he kind of broke out last season into the year, into the playoffs and stuff, but he's continued it. I think what it speaks to with like the Josh Hart thing is I always think of these guys who can't shoot it very well. But real quick mention also, in case Knicks fans are curious, Asar Thompson will not play on Friday. Asar Thompson for the Pistons has blood clots going back to last year, and he's not cleared by the NBA PA, and the medical committee and how all of that works. So just real quick comment there. I was always like, why can't people just do what Draymond does? Just like Draymond has navigated this. Draymond dribbles right into DHOs. Draymond cuts off the ball. Draymond sets a flare screen. And when your guy's not standing next to you and you set a screen, nobody's not there to do help on said screen. So why can't everybody figure it? What I've come to realize is it's just not that easy. Like there's a lot of quick processing and understanding there. I think Josh Hart is a guy that can figure it out. With that said, if I was the Pistons, I would come out tomorrow and just not guard him and like let him shoot 5 threes to start the game and see what happens. Like see if you can get in his head, because this Knicks offense is scary. And I think one area the Pistons are really going to struggle, and this is where I would do it. I would rotate off him to the cat pick and pops. Duren does not guard the pick and pop very well. He really struggles. This Pistons team in general has really struggled against stretch bigs. So I would give a lot of help off Josh Hart to that. Now, Hart can break that down by cutting off of it and offensive rebounds and stuff like that. But just looking at the raw numbers here, Andrew, the offensive rating, they are 3rd. Brunson's not even like cooking, like
he's been off. His shot's been off so far this year. Yeah.
Bridges couldn't shoot supposedly to start the year, but now is figuring it out. Hart's actually been okay. OG's shooting under 30% from 3. And then you have no other players to speak of right now because everybody's hurt. With all due respect to
2 players played 40 minutes last night. Shout out Tom Thibodeau.
Campaign, yes. Jericho Sims, what? My guy,
Ariel Hook-Porty. Like that's the bench. That's the bench.
Hook-Porty getting, listen, I like Ariel Hook-Porty. I think he like the amount of love he's getting to get minutes is crazy. Like that,
Mitch Robinson's down, Precious Achiuwa is down, Jericho Sims is a wild card, and Karl-Anthony Towns
fouled out the other night. Yeah, the Knicks should have done. They should have got Day'Ron Sharpe from the Nets while they were getting Mikal Bridges. Like I screamed all offseason.
So you probably would have had to include Deuce is the problem. And you had...
Then I would not have done that.
That's the issue is like you were already going all in on the picks.
I know. I just... I feel a little bit justified because I talked about the Knicks center situation all summer long. Also, the Pelicans down there. I know they're battling a lot of injuries, but...
Well, there's more than just their center issues, but they do have center issues.
I will say, though, Yves Missi has been pretty good down there. He's done some good things as a rookie down there. Not to turn this into a NBA all-around podcast.
Well, this now has become a Pelicans film school. So I'll try to get it back on the rails as we wrap up. The Mount Rushmore question I go to for everybody is last year it was Mount Rushmore of rivals, who are the 4 teams that your fan base doesn't like the most or looks at as their rivals. Now it's about villains. And I'm curious, the 4 sports figures, the coaches, the players, is there a fan or a personality? Like someone, I forget who it was, but brought up like, during the Miami Heat one, it was like all the media that hate the Heat.
The statue. They brought up the statue.
You're right. The statue. Exactly. That's one of the villains in Heat culture. You tell me, Bryce, the 4 figures that Pistons fans seem to hate the most throughout the history.
By the way, I can't believe you posted that because I dropped an F-bomb and I was like...
Again, it was funny and you apologized 2 minutes later.
I know, but I couldn't get myself to repost it.
Repost it?
That's why I didn't repost it. It's like, nah, I better not.
I figured. Yeah. It's why I sent it to be like, is this okay? And then when no one said no, I was like, it's
cool
okay.
with it. It's just like, I probably don't need this on my specific timeline.
Right,
I don't know if people know like that. I don't know that people around here know. It wasn't on my personal account, but on the... Anyway, so I would say the Bucks to start. It seemed like, so here how I try to approach it is like
as villains. Okay.
Like, I just think that's the team that the Pistons fan base hates the most right now. Like, here's how I looked at it is like, who would they want to beat? Who would they be most excited to beat? Like, just because they dislike them? I guess maybe that's your rivals. Is that a little too much?
That's more of a rival. So I'm looking at like, is Michael Jordan still the biggest villain?
Yes. So I was gonna say Jordan because I know I have to be careful talking about him in too good of a light or Pistons fans come after me.
Mm-hmm.
So this is where it's hard for me. Like, I'm not a lifelong Pistons fan, so I don't have the deep rooted. I was going to say like there's got to be some with the Lakers and LeBron just because it's the Lakers. There's a little bit of history there. And then the Isaiah Stewart LeBron thing that I mentioned earlier.
Okay.
So that, you know who
LeBron? Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I'd say one right now is Jaylen Brown because of his comments.
What were his comments? I actually missed them.
Something about on media day, something about like Hauser and Pritchard beating. Essentially, it was like beating crappy teams like the Pistons. Like he was making a reference to beating crappy teams, and the only team he specifically named was Detroit.
Okay.
So, Mo Wagner is an interesting one. He like hip checked Killian Hayes a couple years ago, and Mo's kind of known for being this type, but he played at Michigan, so there's like an interesting little dynamic there with Mo.
Yeah. Yeah.
My personal one is Jimmy Butler because my wife loves him and I don't appreciate that very much.
So it's because your wife likes him, you don't like it?
Yeah, she won't watch a Pistons game, and then if they're playing the Heat, she's like, "Oh, is Jimmy playing?" It's like,
"Oh, wow, it's one of those." Okay,
he sprained his ankle. He's not playing tonight.
Got it. I had that with like an ex from years ago. Loved Sam Darnold. Thankfully, he's not a Jet quarterback anymore. But I'm not talking about football anymore. That sport doesn't exist.
We can talk world. Football.
You're a Kansas City Chiefs fan, so life must be nice.
Life's not bad. And at the end of the day, I'm not a Lions fan, but the Detroit Lions are pretty good also. Benedict Mathurin is an interesting one because of the J.I. Benedict Mathurin situation. Like Benedict Mathurin was picked right after J.I. and Mathurin has taken it very, very personal. I think it was in the Rising Stars game last year where Mathurin like went at J.I. and then Mathurin ended up winning most valuable player or whatever the award is in that game. So Mathurin would be one. I still think I don't know that the Bucks are villains, but I would just say I think that's the team that they like to beat the most right now. I'm trying to think of any other players. When you're as bad as the Pistons are, it's just hard to Scotty Barnes, maybe another one. Because Scotty Barnes and Jalen Green are interesting ones because of Cade.
Right.
So Pistons fans that class. And so, that's another one where I think those are guys they want to definitely see Cade outplay, especially when they go head to head.
So I do hope that over time, as the Pistons go from competent to competitive to contending, that these villains become more prominent, because I started off with Michael Jordan and LeBron James, and I'm sure there's a Magic Johnson element to it because of those battles in the 80s, the early 2000s. It was really just LeBron, and then pick a Spur, but that was more organization versus organization. So yeah, I'm very curious to see how the Pistons is this right direction they've been pointed in, if those villains start to resurface. Because that's the thing, as a Knicks fan, we went from just happy to be competent again, and then that first Trae Young series was oh my gosh, I hate someone again. This is awesome. I forgot what sports hate is like. And then this past season with Joel Embiid was we've graduated to I just forever,
Regular season matchups are hard to get that, right? Even if you play a team multiple times, those games have to be very memorable or the same player has to cook you for 40, like Kelly Oubre, right? Maybe Kelly Oubre is a villain because it's a name I remembered, gets buckets on Detroit. He actually didn't last night, finally. So, but whenever you play a series, it's in a playoffs, it's a lot easier to remember those. And it's so many games in a short amount of time against the same team that those things start to develop. And as people know, Detroit just hasn't had one of those in a while.
So I think you just hit it, that the way you create a villain is you see them over the course of a week and a half, 2 weeks during a long series. Halliburton tapped into that, but we were just, the Knicks were so banged up that any Halliburton front running just didn't matter to us at the end of the day. The Joel Embiid factor is what Knicks fans left last postseason with. So we'll see. Pistons make a run, maybe to the play-in. I didn't ask you because we're out of time, but the disappointing season. What does a disappointing season look like for the Pistons? One word answer. Is it the play-in? Is it top 10 pick? What is a disappointing?
A disappointing season?
Yeah. Or I will be disappointed in this season if, I guess the Pistons, this should be a different question. I will be satisfied with this Pistons season if blank.
25 plus wins led by Cade and J.I.
So hit the over. J.I. and
Here's
Cade
how
Cunningham have progressed, but you're still in the top 10 of a supposed to be an elite.
I'm not expecting play-in. I just don't think that's realistic.
Okay.
But if they win 28 games because of Tobias Harris, Tim Hardaway Jr., Malik Beasley, I don't think that's a quality season. That's not the season you're looking for. If they win 25 games, kind of looking like what we saw last night on Wednesday, which was a game very much led by Cade and J.I., and those guys not only playing staggering, but playing well together on the floor, that's a very, very productive season with some minutia of the Jalen Duren, Asar Thompson, Ron Holland stuff. But to me, Cade and J.I. are the guys for this organization. That's for me. Not all Pistons fans agree with that, to be clear, but that's where I'm at.
We'll get into that next time. And look, the last thing I'll leave you with, my hot take, 28 wins might be the 10th seed in the Eastern Conference with how bottom heavy that the bottom half of the Eastern Conference is. Bryce, as always, it is good to talk to you. In this context, it's even more fascinating to talk about just one specific team that plays in Detroit. Thank you so much for joining me this morning. Before you get out of here, please let the fine folks at home know where they could find you and all the stuff that you do.
Yeah, so at Motor City Hoops on Twitter, anything I do, Substack, podcast, whatever, you can find there. So follow. It's not just Pistons content. I do a lot of NBA draft and general NBA now because of the Game Theory podcast on my personal Substack, on the Motor City Hoops Substack, Pistons game analysis. So if you want to see my notes after Friday night's game, you can go read that on the Substack. I'll have Knicks notes as well. And then eventually there'll be NBA draft coverage as well. But definitely listen where Andrew and I are colleagues over on the Game Theory podcast with the Sam Vecini.
The Sam Vecini, indeed. Bryce, as always, thank you for linking up for this. And everybody watching, thank you so much for joining me for another edition of the Knicks Film School pregame show. If you dig the show, please head over to iTunes, drop a 5-star rating and a review. I will be back on Monday to preview the Knicks' next matchup. I actually blank on who they're playing. I think it's the Rockets. It might be the Hawks. I just know we'll have a ton of content covering all of it in the not too distant future. But until next time. Oh, I forgot. I got to plug the reason that the Pistons game is so significant Friday isn't just because the Knicks play the Pistons, and they're not the team that has lost 5 straight games. They're going to be playing a competent Pistons team, but we will be at T-Squared Social this Friday for the Knicks next KFS watch party. Join us at 5:30 in Midtown Manhattan at T-Squared Social, 7 East 42nd Street. We'd love to see you there. Okay, got through all the plugs. Until next time, thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. Enjoy the game tonight, and I will speak with you soon.